Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be made in any amount and would go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thanks in advance for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Hey there, and welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today's guests are Microsoft Master Trainers, international keynote speakers, and training and education consultants Alberto and Mario Herraéz, aka the eTwinz. Mario and Alberto were born in Salamanca, Spain, arriving in America as student educators in a Spanish language immersion program in Syracuse, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. Shortly after completing their internship, both returned home to finish their education and just 1 year later returned to Utah as full-time teachers in the same program. Taking advantage of all America had to offer, the twins continued their education, mastering the implementation of technology in education. Along the way, they picked up numerous awards and accolades and have since become master trainers and partners with Microsoft and numerous others, which has allowed them the ability to offer their students a 21st century education on the bleeding edge of technology. This mastery of technology and communication has led to numerous keynotes and workshops where the eTwins have adapted their teaching techniques to train corporate clients around the world how to leverage technology and communication skills to thrive in the future of work. Joining us today to speak about digital transformation, developing future-ready skills, leveraging technology in remote training, and the power of global communication. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Alberto and Mario Herraéz. Hey, fellas, how are ya?
Good. How are you doing? How are you?
Doing good, guys. Super excited to have you on. And it's funny, and I'll just kind of put it out there. So, I mean, you know, everybody just heard the introduction. And if anybody's been paying any amount of attention to me or any of the podcasting I'm doing, you've no doubt heard us talk about Spain, our Spanish kids, our Spanish brothers, our Spanish whatevers. You know, we've talked about these guys lots of times in lots of different contexts. So I'm not going to pretend that I don't know them. But nonetheless, so Mario and Alberto, I don't know if you guys want to sort of self-identify which of you is which. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, why we know each other, and then what we're doing here.
I'm Alberto.
And I am Mario.
And I was fortunate enough to live with Ryan and with his family for a year when I came here to do the scholarship. And since then we just became family. They've been to Spain a lot of times. and I'm like a big brother for his kids, and same Mario.
Yeah,
so.
same. So we are fortunate enough to be part of their family, and they are part of our family too. So it's been a great relationship throughout all of these years.
Yep, I love that. And I'm really excited too that our roads have sort of crossed and we've been able to actually do something like this now with the, you know, the work that I'm doing here in the remote workspace, and then sort of the things you guys are doing with international training and all this kind of stuff. So, but before we get all the way down the road to that, maybe let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you guys are, where you're from, and sort of how you got to where you are today.
It's a long journey, right? Like, sis, if you think where we were like 5 or 6 years ago, we were just student teachers, right? But I think like we, all this journey was like learning and working hard and coming from Spain all the way here and start learning and kind of like making the big jump to international speakers and doing workshops around the world has been a like long journey, but it has been worth it, right?
Yeah. So we started, like, as you said, coming from Spain 5 years ago as interns, doing our internship. And from there, we just kept learning. And then we were introduced to kind of like the Microsoft, expert community, which are teachers that want to keep learning about technology and about digital transformation. And that opened like a huge new world for us of digital transformation and other experts that we could connect with to be able to keep growing. And, so yes, from that point, we just kept kind of like making connections in that new ed tech world. And then those connections took us to keep learning, like get a lot of awards. And then just, now we are kind of training teachers around the world, training even organizations, and doing just workshops every week.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and I think it's a really inspirational story. I mean, first of all, is like just sort of an American tale, right? This is a pretty exciting thing. The immigrants have come over to this new, to the new country, and through hard work and perseverance have managed to craft a life for themselves. And I think that's pretty amazing. Also, I mean, I want to point out that you guys were given a unique opportunity. The school that my boys go to and that these guys teach at is a Microsoft technology school. And, back in the sort of pre-pandemic days, before we were talking everybody going remote, this school was really advanced in that respect. Everybody was already using one-to-one technology and things like that. And these guys have had the opportunity to be working with it and teaching kids how to use it for many years prior to the pandemic. So actually, I would say when the pandemic hit, we actually landed on our feet pretty well. At least I can speak from our family's experience. And my youngest son, I mean, he was still in elementary school at the time the pandemic hit. And I mean, but he was very capable of, logging into his software every day and doing his work and all that stuff. So I think it's pretty cool. And so that opportunity, sort of allowed you guys the opportunity to get access to all these, great organizations, leveraging technology and communication.
Yeah, I think it was, you kind of like defined it like perfectly, because we were ready. We always say that we want to kind of prepare students and kids for their future, right? Like for how the future of the work environment will look like. And this is the future of the work environment, right? Like working remotely, working with technology and just using technology in our daily life. So our goal before the pandemic hit was like pretty much that, getting them ready for their future, because we really thought that their future was going to be this. So we saw this coming before it happened. We knew that the future of the like work environment, of the future of the jobs was going to be something like this, something like people working from all over the world, like in the same project, in the same ideas, working together, collaborating. And we can do all of these thanks to technology.
Yeah, and exactly. And what Alberto said about like how we prepare students for the future, not just like focusing on education, but in general, we really thought that like kind of like a revolution or a big, I don't want to say a revolution, I would say like a big evolution, okay, was needed in a lot of different fields, but specifically in education. And the pandemic gave us a lot of bad things because, like a lot of sad things and a lot of like negative things happened, but it forced us to kind of like to grow in a year what we would have grown in like 5 or 6 years with no pandemic. And we're talking about collaboration remotely. We're talking about integration of technology in a lot of different fields. So kind of that pandemic and this new environment, this new kind of like, I would say, set up for a lot of employees and students kind of like forced us to be, to kind of like grow faster than we should have.
But even like companies, not just students, not just education, companies have changed the way they do things overnight, right? Like in like just a couple, 3 weeks, they change the way they do things. For example, our dad, he was used to go to the office every single day, and he was trained in those like tech like apps or softwares that allow him to work from home now. And they're even thinking about like not going back never again to the office, because the company is thinking, well, why do I need to pay for the facility if my like employees can work from home? So that change, I think it has happened overnight, or like 2-3 weeks. Those like companies has adapt to this new reality, which we truly think that is going to be the new reality from now on. Like people are going to work from home, are going to work from all over the world in the same project, and it's why we think that we should teach in this way. We knew it before, but now we have kind of the reason, and we have like we have those kind of data that kind of like support us in this kind of learning.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I won't name the company that your dad works for, but I happen to know. I mean, it's a very prominent company, right? So I mean, this is a huge company in your home country of Spain. And, I mean, for those guys to even be considering the idea of not going back to work is pretty amazing. I mean, and honestly, it can make some really big waves in sort of the Spanish economy, because this company is huge. Also, just sort of, I'd like to sort of point out specifically, just because you guys are from Spain and I happen to have quite a fair bit of experience in Spain, the prospect of working remotely was almost not even a thing in Spain prior to this. I mean, you guys are actually pretty advanced for Spaniards because, now granted, I mean, of course, everybody's had to adapt and evolve, and I'm sure there've been a lot of good, a lot of great progress made. But prior to the pandemic, I mean, remote work wasn't as stylish, I guess, in Spain as it is here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it is because like our culture, like for us, like even in the business world or in our daily life, make kind of real connections with our clients or real connections with our friends, like face-to-face conversations. You need to trust that person. It is super important. So that's why it was super hard in Spain, for the people to wrap their mind around, just like working remotely, because you need that relationship, that face-to-face contact with your client or your employee to be able to kind of build that confidence between both parts, So for us in Spain, business are done when you are having dinner together, or when you're at a restaurant, just like having a coffee, or at a bar or something. That's how business were made in Spain before. That's how you did things in Spain. So that's now. It's been so hard for a lot of companies to make that transition from those face-to-face and creating those face-to-face relationships to just go into kind of like an online environment. And that's happened to you too, right? Like it was hard at the beginning for you when you started to do business in Spain. Yeah. Like this is not working the same way that it's in America.
Yeah, no, because, it's funny.
We need that. Yeah, we need that relationship, right? Like that build that trust, and then okay, we know each other now let's do business together, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. And just to sort of talk a little bit about that, sort of in my early days in Spain, which I guess at this point have been 4 or 5 years ago now, it became immediately apparent to me. I was already working remotely. I was already working from home and doing that, just that's always been my modality. But when I tried to apply the tricks or whatever, the methodologies that I would use here in the States to seek out new business and build relationships, virtually here in the States, and did so with pretty decent success. When I tried to apply that stuff to sort of Spanish culture, it just flat didn't work. And especially in those early days, I was looking not even just at specifically Spanish people, but like Northern Europeans living in Spain, because I had very little Spanish at the time. And my Spanish isn't a lot better now, but it's better than it was then. And so, I was sort of cheating by looking for people who would probably have good English. But even at that, most of them are still sort of culturally Spanish. And this is the thing. I mean, they just, an email and a smile or a Zoom call or whatever is going to be okay, but it's certainly not going to go as far as, a beer and a tapa or something. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still the case. Like, I mean, honestly, even here in the States, I mean, if you can sit down and have a meal with somebody versus a Zoom call, I think you'll probably make more, you'll cover more ground. But in Spain, especially pre-pandemic, I mean, it just was the way things were done. And I imagine that post-pandemic, while I'm certain most Spaniards will go back to the way it was, or at least, they'll still have that emphasis on in-person meetings as often as they can. What I'm hoping's happened is maybe some of the fear and trepidation that kept them from embracing remote work earlier will now provide, maybe now they'll have the ability to trust a little more and understand that things are going to be okay if we work from home. And maybe that'll open up more opportunities for Spaniards who, can't maybe find work because they live in a small village or, whatever the circumstance might be, but maybe they're better able to find employment now that they could work for a international company or something.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic was kind of the excuse to try it out. A lot of companies were like, okay, we don't know if we need to try it out, if it's a good idea to work from home. Things are working great right now, just people going to the office, but also we want to try maybe to kind of work online or work remote. But this pandemic gave them the opportunity to start kind of this new approach or these new ideas, and they saw that it kind of work, right? So maybe those are kind of the first steps for them to kind of start using this approach from now on.
Well, and I think even for American companies, you mentioned earlier, now you have the data, right? Now we've seen the data and we understand whether it's working or not, right? I think a lot of people are confused when they speak with remote work advocates or they listen to people on YouTube or on Clubhouse or wherever they're listening. You hear a lot of remote work people talk as if remote work is meant to be the future of things. But I think most of us look at remote work as one flexible component of work. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that everyone must be remote, but rather remote could be a part of your work. And so now with the data in hand after a year of pandemic and every remote work advocate would say this is not the way we should have gone remote. But now we've collected a bunch of data and maybe we understand, maybe this will work for our company or maybe it just flat doesn't, right? And I almost say, if the data shows that your company won't work remote, then odds are it's a leadership problem, not a remote work problem. But nonetheless, now you can arm yourself with this data and make decisions, right? So if you're a Spanish company, maybe you can look at it and go, God, we could save a lot of money, like your father's company, for example, hey, maybe we can save a bunch of money by letting our people work from home. Easy enough.
I think for companies it's really good as well, because before you just kind of work with the people that was around you, people that were from my country or my city, or people that were willing to move to the city where I have my office, right? It's just a small group of people. But what about if you need an expert of whatever, and he or she lives in Japan? You couldn't have access to her because you need to kind of offer her a contract, ask her to move all the way to where you have your office and everything. Right now, you want someone is really good at something that work in the other part of the world. You can just offer the project or the idea, and it is happening. You kind of are going to get more talent in your company because you can get that talent from all over the world, since everyone is working online or remote. You don't need to offer a big contract and ask her or him to move. So it's just can be done remotely, and that's a lot of talent that a lot of companies are going to have access to.
Yeah, and that's what Alberto said, is for hiring purposes as well. When we work with all of these big companies, we work with people that are located in Brazil, we in Lebanon, in Morocco, in India, So that's what it's showing, is that those big companies, they don't care where you are from. They want the best one at that, at that job. And now they're hiring people that are in the other side of the world because they are doing it remotely, but they have the best one for that job. And before that, we were not remote. You could find the best one in your city, or the best one in your state or country,
or the best one who was willing to move.
Exactly.
Right?
But right now you can have the very best person for that job, because you can hire someone that is super good, I don't know, in Japan or in China or even in Spain. So I think that for hiring purposes has been a great improvement as well.
Yeah, nope, I think you're right. So let's transition a little bit and start working into some practical things that maybe people can apply in their businesses. So obviously education is your background, but also, that parlays itself nicely into training and helping corporate environments grow. You guys spend a lot of time talking about, communications and leveraging technology, things like that. But one of the things that you espouse is this idea of developing future ready skills. And I wondered if we could maybe have a little conversation about what that is as a primer to, later topics.
Yeah. So future ready skills is basically the skills that the employees, or in this case, our students or your employees, are going to need to be successful in their future job. So they are, they are skills that could be problem solving. That could be collaboration, could be communication,
critical thinking,
even could be social emotional learning, empathy. All of those skills that you can think of that could be used in a working environment or in a specific job.
And that's like, that kind of like shows us that in the future, like right now in the classes, which means like it will happen in the future in the companies, like we are more focused on skills than maybe on what, like on content of what that person knows, right? Like, because if you have really great skills, I can train you. If you have the attitude, I can train you. But right now it's not about how much you know, how much content you know.
It's not like that anymore. It's about like what you know, what to do, or what your skills are. And then, as Alberto said, I will teach you the content, I will teach you how to do the work, but you need to have these specific skills for me to be able to work with you, or for me to be able to train you.
Like right now there are like bunch of like tests around the world happening, like for students and for companies, that they just want to know what's the skills they need for a specific job, right? For example, you are like graphic designer, right? So you need like this and this skill for this job. So I'm gonna look for those people that are kind of like really good at those skills, and I will train them, right, in the way I want, because I know they're going to be successful. They're going to use the skills that they already have for this job. Like that transferation of skills from jobs are what like people are focusing right now.
Another very important thing is because of like how fast everything is changing. Like we can't kind of train employees, or we can teach students anymore focusing on concept or in content. Why? Because we don't know what is going to happen in 5 years. If we think about let's say that 10 years ago, you had a conversation with someone, or even 15 or 20 years ago, and that person had told you that someone was going to get paid to kind of like to take care of the social media of the companies, right? Like a community manager. If someone had told you that 20 years ago, everyone would have laughed. It's like, it is impossible that someone is going to get paid, just to take care of the social media of the companies. But right now that is happening. So like we are trying to teach or to train our employees for jobs that are not even invented yet, or for projects that your company are gonna get, or you're gonna work on that are not even invented yet, or like you don't think about them. So that's why it is super important to focus on skills versus focusing on content.
So for example, you hire a graphic designer, I'm just like using the same example, and that graphic designer is really good at like something specifically, right? But maybe that kind of job evolves in 5-10 years, and that person will need different skills, right? Or even the same skills, but like different, like specific content. Like for example, you know how to draw really well, but maybe in 5-10 years, those things that you know already, it's not gonna work in the future, or they are not going to be as needed as like other skills. So that's why focusing on skills kind of like give you the opportunity to have that really great employee that can evolve and use those skills in different areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that sort of foundational knowledge is really critical. And, obviously there's a lot of sort of news about, stereotypical students that are coming through the work, into the workforce now that lack skills in problem solving and empathy and some of these other things that you've mentioned. And it makes a lot of sense to me that we should be teaching our kids at a younger age how to do these things. I mean, obviously it's pretty presumptuous to assume we know what's going to be in the future or what type of work they might want to go for. And so to try and train them up to be X, Y, or Z doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But if you teach them, how to be critical thinkers, how to be problem solvers, how to collaborate in a team, how to do these different sorts of skills that are a little bit more foundational, then, they would ultimately be much more prepared for a future position.
Exactly. And then there's this report that we really love. Like if someone is more interested about all of these things, OECD does a yearly report every year and talks about what are the most important skills in the future. In this case, like this year, they say kind of like a top 15 skills for 2025. But they do this report every year, OECD, and it's called the Future of Jobs report. So they talk there about how to train employees. They talk about what skills are going to be super important and all of that. And like in the last, I think 5 or 6 years, number one skill has been critical thinking. Like top one in the last 5 years. So that is showing to us that, information is, I wouldn't say is not important anymore. It is super important, but I would say like memorizing that information or having that knowledge is important because we know that, but it is not as important as it was before. You just don't need to memorize all that information. What you need to be able to do is kind of like to search for that information and to be able to apply that information successfully in different contexts. Let's say that before we had a lack of information because we only had information from books. We could only read that information because we were not gonna go with like 25 books everywhere to solve problems. But right now we have our phone, we have our Apple Watch, we have a lot of things that are with us. So now we have another different problem, which is we have too much information. So now those skills like critical thinking should be focusing on how to take that information and how to use it appropriately in different contexts that different contexts in your workplace, in your job.
And there are more organizations like the OECD that Mario mentioned. The Global Forum also has a report on this that's really, really interesting. So we highly recommend to read those two reports that they go out every year to kind of like predict what's coming. And that's going to help companies a lot to kind of like focus on what kind of employees they want to hire, because those are the skills that you need to look for, to have in your company. Those are skills that are going to be really important in the future.
Yeah, I think those reports are a great place to start because, really, if you look at maybe the top 5 or 10, they don't change a lot. They might shuffle around a little bit, or one thing is number 1 this year and number 3 next year or whatever. But there's a set of core skills there. Maybe in that top 10, maybe it's 5 out of those 10 that are persistently apparently underaddressed. Like these people aren't doing enough with these 5 or 6 skills, and if you are a savvy, person who's going to be entering the job market, or if you're even just looking for a new position, maybe now post COVID, you want to stay remote and your company is going back to the office and you would like to find a new remote position, understanding those core skills is going to set you up really well for whatever your future might be.
Exactly. And we have here the list. First one would be critical thinking. Second one, problem solving. Third one, self-management. Fourth one, collaboration. The fifth one is communication. Sixth one is use of technology and development. And then physical activities, So those ones are the core ones, the most important ones. And as you said, they're going to shovel, but it's going to be we predict that these top 10, top 15 will be the same for the next at least 5 years.
And they're going to get more and more and more important. And people are going to start really soon to talk more and more and more about the future of jobs and how we can because companies actually they are in a race for talent, right? They try to find that talent and they compete against each other. That's the reality. They compete to get that talent. So you can go be ahead of the game and know what kind of abilities or skills you are looking for. It's going to make a big difference.
Yeah. And it's funny, those first 5, the 5 that you read are basically all, if you were looking at the remote workers handbook, those first 5 are the things to have mastered. Mm-hmm. Right. And right now, like you mentioned, and like we were talking about prior, companies are now, or I guess now have access to people all over the planet, right? So in theory, they can be hiring the best and brightest in any particular role, right? So this sort of raises the bar for your standard employee, right? I mean, if you want to go work for somebody, you might have used to be able to get away with being a B or a C type, employee. Maybe you could be kind of crappy and still get away with it, but ultimately now you've got to sort of transition to becoming that A employee, right? And you've got to become somebody that's actually looked for. And so by upskilling and learning these, mastering these sort of 5 buckets, you're in a really good position to sort of outmatch a lot of your competition, who maybe, maybe they're really good tactically, maybe they understand the software really well or whatever, but, a great salesperson who's horrible with people, is not going to be the guy you want to keep. I mean, the one you're going to want to keep around is somebody who's great with everybody, even if they have a little less sales.
And also we need to keep in mind that working in these skills you don't close any doors. I mean, you don't you have all your you have open a lot of possibilities, because for example, if we back to a graphic designer example, if you want to master Photoshop and you spend 2-3 years mastering Photoshop, you are going to be just ready to use Photoshop, but if you master critical thinking, you're going to be able to do a lot of more things, right? Like you're going to, you want to be that A-type employee. You can be an A-type, not just using Photoshop, like doing critical thinking, which will transfer to a lot of jobs. You don't close those opportunities. You don't stop having those opportunities because you are too focused on outsource.
Yes, we're not saying that you don't have to work on that, on Photoshop because it's kind of important, right? But what we're trying to say is maybe priorities should change, in the way that you focus on your own training. If you're self-employed or if you want to get hired for a big company, maybe your kind of a priority should change and be more focused on these skills.
Yeah, well, and I think you bring up a really good point that we haven't really touched on, but it's this idea of sort of lifelong learning, right? And how important it is to keep going. It's not good enough to just sort of learn. I don't know. This would be too broad a term to just pin down, but to learn communication. Right. Yeah. It's a lifelong thing. Like you're continually learning how to become a better communicator, how to, be a better listener, be more empathetic, understand better what people are saying to you, those sorts of skills, so to tie this back to this Photoshop discussion, with Photoshop, they roll out a new version, every, 6 months, there's a new edition of Photoshop these days. And, if you had stopped at Photoshop 1, well, sure, Photoshop. Technically, but Photoshop has evolved a lot since then. And for people, I happen to work in the advertising business and I do a lot of stuff in Photoshop, but I have to keep up on that stuff all the time just to sort of stay relevant, right? If you don't understand what your software can actually do for you, then you can easily start falling behind. And so I think it's important to just sort of stress that point that, it's not enough to just say, okay, well, I've mastered empathy. No, empathy is a practice. It's something you work on all the time. And there's, this need for continual learning.
That's super important. And then when you brought up empathy, this is another completely new discussion that could take we could be talking about this hours, but I wanted to bring up the point of one of the hardest things about skills and one of the problems that companies are going to run into is that what is empathy? What is communication?
How do we measure
How do we measure what is a good communicator? How do we measure? We're talking about not my opinion is no. We want data. How do we measure what is a good communicator? Who is a good communicator? How do we measure empathy? This person is very has a lot of empathy. How do we measure that? With numbers. With
actual data. It is super hard. So that's why this is super hard. These skills are very hard to measure and are very hard to kind of to teach at the same time, because what maybe empathy is for you is not the same for me, or even we talk about what empathy is for me, it is not the same for a person in China, for example, in the other side of the world. Those are very, very broad terms, that is super, super hard to narrow that down to kind of I would say a common definition of what that is, or a common way to measure that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes up all the time, and for everybody who's been listening to the show all season, go ahead and take a shot, go ahead and drink. I'm going to bring up the magic word, which is intention again. And so much around, empathy, and you're right. These terms are really hard to sort of pin down, right? There's some probably superficial testing and, do you think X when somebody asks you why, then, okay, then you're empathetic, or there's probably some metrics that you could come up with, but you're right. The definitions are ambiguous, and I think that that's a big part of it. So as a leader communicator, it's your job to pass down what your definition of is, in this case, empathy. So as you're leading in an organization, it's critical for you to share your definition of that, or the definition that aligns with sort of the company's mission, and make sure that you have buy-in on that, right? So, just, for the very reason that, you could have multiple definitions. So it's very important that you be clear with it. But I think, as important as the practice of empathy or communication or any of these other hot buzzy words that we're talking about is, I think the intention is one of these things. And also it's difficult to measure, but just being intentional about this work and being willing to actually put in the time to become more empathetic and craft these skills, I think is critical. And as it pertains to future learning and developing all these skills, doing so intentionally with an objective in mind. I'm working towards a new position, or I want to become a remote worker, or I'd like to be the best guy in the office at X, whatever it is, sort of setting out with that intention, I think will also help keep you on track.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and also the intention and the drive, right? To kind of like get better and use that intention to kind of like grow, right? In that way.
And another word would be disposition. For example, like if we talk about critical thinking is measured by or has like two different things. The first one is cognitive abilities, and the other one is disposition. For example, you can be very good at evaluation, which is part of critical thinking. But if you don't have disposition for that critical thinking, you don't have an open mind and all of that, you're not going to success, right? So it's kind of the same for all of these skills or what you were saying. You can be very good at something, but if you don't have that disposition of keep learning, being a lifelong learner and all of that, you're not going to grow, you're not going to improve.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think it, is true of all these skills we're talking about. I mean, everything is sort of this balancing act, right? You become better. Some people are just going to be better. I don't know, maybe they're better listeners than they are, risk takers or, whatever. Like, I mean, there's a spectrum of skills here to learn. And I think to try and assume that you're going to fill all those buckets and be, the best in the business at all those things is maybe not realistic for most people. But I think knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses can set you up for success as well.
That's really important, because like sometimes also like knowing what you are really good at, like it's going to help you, but also what you have, like your weaknesses, because we always say like we like this like holistic like approach, like, okay, like let's try to be the best version of me, right? Like working, sometimes we are just so focused on working of what we like or what we do better to improve that we forget about those like weaknesses, right? Like, okay, instead of like working on something that I'm really good to get better, let's focus on those weaknesses, those like skills that I don't master that well, and maybe like I'm gonna get like more like the better version of me, that holistic view of an employee.
Yeah. And I think we do a lot of times tend to think, sort of speak in generalizations, right? We talk in these grand terms, these really big things. And I think, narrowing that scope a little bit would be useful. So let's transition a little bit. We talked a little bit about some of the hardships, especially in you guys' home country of Spain, but also there are a lot of companies here in the US that struggled to this transition to go remote for during the pandemic. A lot of people did things well. A lot of people grew and matured and became great remote workers, and companies, grew to thrive in a remote condition. But there are also lots of people that weren't doing it the right way, or maybe don't have all the insights to be doing it right. And as we're turning the corner, hopefully, on COVID and maybe starting to, some of us go back to the office, or some of us, deciding to stay remote permanently, I think it's really important that we start to, put a little bit more emphasis back on using the technology properly, setting the right kinds of expectations around communication and that sort of thing. So I wonder if we could sort of shift gears and talk about just sort of the ways that companies, as we're moving into sort of a more permanent situation, can leverage technology to enhance their communication.
So I would say that first thing that we need to think about when we think about digital transformation, what is that, right? Like, how can we do a digital transformation? How can we use technology in a meaningful way? I think that is for us the big question here, because we can have a lot of great technology, a lot of great devices. We can buy licenses for every software we can think of. But if we don't implement, if we didn't implement a strategy, or if we don't use all of those resources in a good way, your company is not going to be successful, right? And so how do we use this technology? As we say, like in the way that we need to start planning a digital transformation, or we can talk about communication later, is that we need to think about what we want as a company. What's our ending goal, right? How we want to work. And after that, we go out and we try to find the software we need, the devices we need, and all of that. But we've seen in a lot of teachers or in a lot of even organizations that we work with do it in the other way. I've heard that this software, it's very cool and it's working very well. Let's think, how can I use this software in my company? That's not the right way to do it. You set up a goal, you set up a procedure, you set up, you think about how you want your employees to work, or even yourself, how you want to work, what's your philosophy, what's your startup culture, what is your company culture. And once you know what you are going to do, now you need to go and try to find the appropriate technology to do all of this.
Yeah. Well, we always say like technology is just a tool to empower like your kind of your like your company culture. So you need to keep in mind the ending goal, which is how you want your employees to work. How do you want your company to look like? And once you have that in mind, your philosophy, your culture, so you can just go ahead and purchase like software, like technology, laptops, like iPads, whatever you want. But technology shouldn't be the first step. The first step is always like kind of think about your like company culture, your philosophy, how you want the company to look like, and then use technology to empower that shift and kind of achieve the ending goal.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because I think especially as we made the rapid change to remote, and even, I'm sure it's still going on today, as I think it probably did pre-pandemic, a lot of times there's a new shiny thing, right? This great new software, this thing looks really cool, or I think it'll do this thing for us. And so there are a lot of people who sort of jump on these things, without proper training, without proper vetting, without, understanding that end goal. Maybe they're looking at something very small and saying, oh, well, this piece of software would solve that one little problem, but they're not looking at how that one problem contributes to the overall wellness of the company. So I think that that's a really great point on software specifically. Do you have any thoughts like, okay, so let's say that we've selected a suite or a stack of software. Because this is your guys' wheelhouse, maybe we'll talk sort of on the Microsoft side. And, we've decided that, the Microsoft Office suite is going to be the thing we use for, intra-office communication. Do you have any pointers or thoughts or commentary around sort of how we can better communicate, assuming we have the technology in place? So, we could use Slack, we could use Skype, we could use, Zoom. There's a million softwares that do a million things. So, assuming we've chosen the appropriate software to meet our end goals, how do we go about now using that software and leveraging it to become better communicators?
I think the first thing we need to keep in mind is like online collaboration or communication. It kind of sounds like face-to-face communication, but it's so different, right? Like there are a lot of things that we can misinterpret or misunderstand in an online environment. So the first step is that to keep that in mind, because we have seen this this mistake before, like companies trying to kind of act or have the same structure they had face-to-face and put it online. It's not gonna work because it has a lot of like teeny tiny details that are different. So we need to keep in mind that like maybe we need to change or tweak a little bit like the way that we do things. And I think the more important part is structure and organization. Like, for example, if we talk about the Slack or like Teams or other software that have different channels, like the level of frustration when we use technology can rise really high, right? Like, okay, I'm getting frustrated with this software, with this technology, and what that is gonna do is like, it's gonna take down your employee productivity because he or she's going to be super frustrated. And we can just talk about social and emotional skills that, because when you are frustrated, you just cannot work. It's just, you have that like wall that you hit the wall and you're just super frustrated. So your productivity goes down. So the first tip that we always give like organizations is like organize your virtual environment. It needs to look like an office. When you walk into the office, like your employee knows where to find pretty much like everything, knows how to contact the boss, knows how to contact the employees, knows how to like find the materials, knows how to like find the copier, the coffee machine. So it's just teeny tiny details, but we need the same in a virtual environment. For the communication to be effective, we need all the employees to know how to do it, to know where to find those things, how to communicate among them, where to find the documents they're going to use for the project. All those things are really important in a virtual environment.
And as Alberto said, all of these softwares, like you can create channels, you can create different working groups and all of that. So just take advantage of that. Like sometimes we've seen a lot of messes. But like a lot of companies try to kind of like keep it simple, and sometimes when you keep it simple, it gets messy. Why? Because you can have, let's say, let's just have one channel because we want all the communication going through that channel. Well, if I am an employee and I log in and I see 150 messages, that have nothing to do with me or with my work, I'm gonna get frustrated because I'm gonna have to read through a lot of crap that I don't care, Yeah. So that's super important what Alberto said, to be very, very organized in your virtual environment and keep the communication as, I would say, clean as possible. It's great to make announcements. It's great to keep everyone in the loop, but just just keep in mind that as I said, when an employee logs in and all of that and tries to read through 100 emails and then 25,000 texts, he's going to get frustrated, So like, it doesn't mean like you need to keep your communication kind of like simple or you don't need to communicate, but it needs to be as clean and as simple as possible. It doesn't mean that you need to have a lack of communication. It is different.
And consistency is really important. Also, like you need to be constant. You need to pick one software and stick to it. We have seen companies, they have like changed the software they use to communicate several times in just a couple of months. You are driving crazy your employees. They just learn a new software and you are switching to a new one. So just like keep that in mind, that also like takes a lot of time for them to learn the tool. So maybe at the beginning, the communication is not going to be that good, but it doesn't mean it is not working. It means that everyone needs like a learning process. And maybe you're going to see the result of this like improvement or this enhancing of communication in like 2-3 months.
Well, and so speaking of the point that you made earlier about sort of organization, do you guys have any thoughts around sort of like what type of communication to use when? And one example that we use a lot of the time is, maybe a text message is for something super urgent. Slack is for something slightly less urgent. Email can be, get to it tomorrow, and we're going to send a letter if I don't need to hear from you at all. Like, do you have any kind of thoughts around just sort of organization of communication and like what to use when?
Yeah, this is a hard topic because like we've heard a lot of conversations lately about mental health, right? So there's a very, like I would say, there's this line and it's very, very, I would say it's very hard to cross that. I'm very easy to cross that line between communication at work and mental health. And when you're at home and you want to check out, if they send you like a text message to your private phone or they call you to your private phone, all of those things we've seen lately how like big companies or how these big organizations try to avoid that. Is that correct? It's not, depending on your opinion. Like different people have different opinions. But I would
kind of respect that private environment, that private space. When you go home, please don't text me in my phone, right? Just send me an email and I will read it in the future. Like more and more people every day. If it is
an emergency, I will take out the email because I have it connected to my phone, But like a lot of employees or a lot of like, I would say a lot of companies are focusing right now on well-being and are focusing right now on mental health. And they try to avoid those or kind of respect that private space. So I would say that just keep your communication as professional as you can, just focusing on Slack or Microsoft Teams or email. And then try to avoid that text messages or like calls to like a private, like I would say to private phone number, because maybe that's gonna kind of burn out your employees, in the long term.
And also like just think about how you want to communicate like different things. For example, you are kind of like meeting to discuss a project in a couple of days. You need to use always the same channel of communication. If you are you always use emails to kind of like notify about the meetings, you need to always like use emails, because if you use email one time, Slack the next one, Microsoft Teams the next one, that's going to be super hard, because me as an employee are going to expect like receiving the notification through email, but I may not get the email because you send the notification by Microsoft Teams, and I will not like show up to the meeting because I didn't know that it was coming, because I didn't check my Microsoft Teams, because I knew that the meetings always come through emails. So just be like that. That's very
consistent. Like consistency is super important, and structure and organization, as we said. There are some channels of communication and are used for different things, as you mentioned before, and it is super important to keep that in mind. that you need to be consistent in your communication.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And just to sort of touch on a couple of things you talked about. So, of course, the buzzword for this is work-life balance, but, I think that's become sort of played out. So now we're talking about it in terms of sort of, a separation between work and home life. And you're right. I mean, technology has facilitated a lifestyle where it's very easy for us to work all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And I think too, for a lot of remote workers or your digital nomads of the world who maybe have a client in the States, but they're living abroad or something like that, you know, maybe it's okay to have some degree of, you know, anytime type of communication. But to your point about consistency, I think it's right that you use certain types of communication for certain things, right? So if, for example, if you're managing a project through email, I mean, just from an organizational standpoint, how nice is it? Most software will thread your email chain into one thing, and you can sort of, you know, all your conversations related to this topic are in one long thread, so you can go back and refer to old things, you know. So from an organizational standpoint, it makes perfect sense. But also, I mean, if you're sending out a text at, you know, 1 p.m. your time, but it's, you know, 9 p.m. somebody else's time, well, they might be in the middle of dinner and you're interrupting them with something that's probably not that important. And if it is important, then okay, text is maybe the right modality, you know, oh, so-and-so dropped dead. Okay, well, then we need to have a text about that. But if it's something that can wait until tomorrow, or if it could live in Microsoft Teams or on Slack or wherever until the next day, then that's great, you know. And I think that people are allowed to sort of adapt and work in ways that suit them. And in this new world of working remotely, you know, not everybody's going to be working in 8 to 5, but I think that you know, there's sort of a twofold responsibility here. One is you as the employer need to set up structure and organization that sort of dictates how communication is used, and you communicate that transparently to your team so that everybody understands the expectations. And then on the other side of that coin, you as the individual need to be responsible for your own life too. You know, I mean, yeah, your employer may not be that organized, or maybe somebody doesn't pay attention and slips outside of policy or process, but, you know, and they're sending you emails. So you yourself need to be disciplined enough to maybe not take that call or to ignore that text or whatever it is. So I think that there's sort of a little bit of a two-way street there where both parties are responsible. But I think you're right that ultimately it boils down to structure and organization.
It is super hard to find the balance, right? Because I mean, like, you want to have that communication with your employee or with your boss, but at the same time, if you get like every day a text at 10 p.m. when you're having dinner, well, in Spain we have dinner at 10 p.m., right? But at 10 p.m. when you're having dinner with your family, like, you get a text about work every single night. I mean, like, you're gonna get frustrated, and, you know, like, you're gonna get burned out because it's like, okay, I need to leave dinner with my family and I have to work and do something, you know. So, but communication at the same time is important, you know. So just try to find that balance. It's just super hard.
And kind of just like, if we're talking about text, like maybe just emergencies, right? This is what you were saying. You just send the text or the message through Teams and it's going to be there for the next morning, right? Like that person will like read it the next morning. So maybe for something that is not that important, use those channels that you already have set up, and you have already notify your employees how to use properly those channels of communication. That's another like kind of like big part is like you need to kind of tell your employees or train your employees how to use those channels and the expectations for each of them. That's really important.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to touch on under sort of this communication umbrella is video calls and video conferencing. I mean, obviously this is a big part of our day nowadays. And, you know, you guys are doing a lot of your consulting work sort of worldwide. So you spend a lot of time on Zoom. Mm-hmm. You maybe traveled a little more in the before time, but now, you know, nowadays it's everything's being done over Zoom. And I think that this is everybody's experience. So can you talk a little bit about just sort of the etiquette of remote calling? I mean, and it's funny that, you know, here, I mean, so many of us have been remote for, you know, almost a year, maybe more than a year now. And people still don't have this stuff figured out. Like, I mean, we're still not doing it. So I feel kind of dumb even bringing it up here in 2021, but it's like, you know, but this is still a problem. You know, I mean, I had a call just earlier today, and one of the common etiquette things that we sort of espouse is cameras on, right? Everybody has your camera on. Mm-hmm. And so, but I mean, literally I was the only one with my camera on. I thought maybe I could guilt people in, you know, like, hey, you know, if my camera's on and nobody else is, maybe somebody will. But I mean, unless everybody's naked, for some reason they ought to have their cameras on, you know? So, so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just sort of video call etiquette, when to use it, and how to behave on camera.
I think that's really important because how the world has changed, this is going to be the way that we are going to communicate from now on, like for a lot of things. And like having the camera on is as important as you don't show up to a meeting wearing a mask, right? Like you show your face because it's your personality. Like it is the same you don't do, so what I'm trying to say is that you don't do in a virtual environment what you don't do in a face-to-face meeting. So you in a face-to-face meeting, you don't eat your dinner, right? Like while you are like in that meeting. In a face-to-face meeting, you don't wear a mask, or you just like avoid to show your face enough. So like we need to keep in mind that this new way to like do business, like even like we dress up for every meeting we have, and we are like constantly in meetings, like it's crazy how many like online meetings we have, but we dress up for every single day, and we wear like nice clothes the way that we would do if the meeting was face to face. So pretty much the idea is like, don't like try to behave the same way that you behave in a face to face meeting. The problem that I see is like we live in this world that internet or like this like virtual environment is connected with anonymous, right? Like for example, I can create a Twitter account and tweet out like, and no one knows who I am, right? So I just like in that, like from that point of view, I can do whatever I want. So like we transferred that to a kind of like in a working environment, like a virtual environment means that I can do whatever I want, right? Because it is not the same. I'm not face to face to that person.
So like I say, like we like, I don't know if it should be an obligation or like bosses should force employees to have their camera on. But if I was the boss, I would, like if I was in charge of the meeting, I was the coordinator or the manager or whatever, I would force maybe it's like a strong word, but I mean, highly recommend, to kind of like to all my employees to have their camera on, because it's a sign of respect. Out of respect, you need to have your camera on because you're having a meeting with someone else. As Alberto said, what you don't do in a face-to-face meeting, you don't do it in a virtual, like in a video call in a virtual environment meeting, because it's exactly the same. And you need to have your face, and you need to have that, even that. It's hard to build that relationship, to make that connection, but we need to try our best to make that connection with the rest of the people. Yeah. And it is very important too that talking about meetings and all of that, they're kind of boring, right? Like virtual, let's be honest, like video calls are more boring than a face-to-face meetings. And that's a truth. So from the perspective of the one who is presenting, the one that is showing or like sharing content or doing a presentation or whatever, we really try to make the presentation as engaging as we can, with different software, different presentations, or even like being more like, I don't know, like animated, funny or like animated or whatever. Games. Whatever to make that presentation as engaging as you can.
We always talk about this, that is actually true. Like that our generation, like everyone nowadays, they're kind of like, we are facing as presenters, as people that are trying to engage people, we are facing like big companies like Facebook, like Instagram, like all those companies that actually what they do, they spend a lot of money in billions of money to engage people. So what happens right nowadays is like people are just used to get engaged by those like apps, or like that level of engagement is really high. So when we present even in a virtual call, we need to try to match that level of engagement that people has in different apps, in apps that are actually built to engage that people. So that's why it's so important. Like we are
competing against that. Because we're in a virtual environment, and like as Alberto said, those companies kind of like spend millions of dollars to have you like keep scrolling, right? And then keep engaged. And now when we present, it's like, oh my gosh, this boring guy, like I would rather to be on my phone just scrolling, right? But we need to try to be as engaging as we can to be able to kind of like compete against those companies, or against those kind of like external, I would say, engaging activities or whatever.
Because like the virtual environment that people are used to is a really engaging virtual environment that it is led by those companies that spend millions of dollars just to know what colors they use, right? So like we're competing, we're trying to kind of like grab their attention in a virtual environment when they are used to kind of like being in that environment of like marketing and like engage in really high levels of engagement.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I mean, that's the one thing to try and battle sort of the what feels like a shorter attention span, right? Is that you do really have to try and be engaging. And one of the things that you were talking about that I also just wanted to comment on is, I had sort of led the conversation with this idea that cameras should be on, but you guys made the point about sort of developing relationships and how difficult it is to develop a relationship this way, but we need to just try our best, right? And I mean, ultimately, if we can't see your face, I mean, we're already missing out on the opportunity to see your body language and the way that you're, squirming around in your chair or whatever during a meeting, right? We're already missing out on so many cues that we would normally use to make decisions, so if we can't see your face minimally, but I've heard a lot of advocates talking lately about, step back in your camera, get back a little ways so that people can see, are you slouched over? Are you, playing with your hands? Do you have your, phone in front of you, whatever it is. And, so I think that that's really important, I mean, as we're trying to use more and more of these virtual, meetups, by video, when now it's sort of the way that things are done instead of something we do sort of novelly, here and there. I think it's really important that we do that. So, one last topic that I wanted to get into before we get out of here is one that I think you guys can maybe just comment on a little bit because of being non-American people. I mean, the fact that you guys are from Spain, Spanish people working in sort of an American environment. One of the things that's happening more and more, and will continue to happen more and more as people from all over the world can work for companies all over the world, and you're gonna end up getting a lot of sort of cross-cultural connections with people, right? You're going to be working with people from other parts of the world who come from maybe different types of societies or different countries that have different sort of cultural norms and things like that. And I wondered if you guys could share any experiences or maybe talk about how we can be better communicators in a cultural context, how we can be empathetic and understand people's cultural differences and then build that into the way that we communicate with one another.
I think it's really important to kind of like have a background of the culture that you are interacting with, right? Like have a background of like who you are talking to. For example, we went to a big conference in Paris like three years ago, and like there were like educators from all over the world, and like Dubai, China, Africa, like,
literally from all over the world.
All over the world. And so we were there to present, and one of the activities they did is like kind of like they made these groups of like teachers or like trainers around the world. They made these groups, and the point was like we needed to work together to work on like a project of the way we trained and everything. So one thing we did is like we just check all the people that were in our group and kind of like get a little background of their culture, of the way we can communicate, of the do's and don'ts in that interaction that we were going to have. So that's really important. Have like a kind of a background, like how that culture talks, like what that means in that culture. You do something because you can be offending them and you don't even know it. Right?
Yeah. For example, like we did, as Alberto said, we checked, like who was in our group and from what countries they were, and then we just take their background, like their culture, what they're used to, what you can do, what you can't. And one of the examples is that there was a lady in Alberto's group that was from a culture that you're not supposed to touch the woman, like not even like a handshake, or
you don't supposed to approach
the woman, not even a handshake, not even introduce yourself, or in Spain like we kiss in the
everybody
cheeks.
Gets the two kisses.
Yeah. Just forget about that, but like yes, it's so like we are very sure that if Alberto didn't know that, and he would have approached that woman, the first impression had been awful, because you have that kind of like that tension that she reacted in a weird way because she didn't like it, and Alberto would have been confused, like what is going on? She doesn't like me, and you know what I mean. So like, do some like a background research about who you are working with and what are their culture and their expectations and all of that. It is super important.
And also talk about it. That's really important. Like there is a taboo around this a lot of time. Like just be honest and talk. Communication is so important. Like, oh, I didn't know this offended you. I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was going to hurt you. I'm so sorry. Or in my culture, we do things like this. In my culture, this is from my point of view, like all those things are really important in a like cultural exchange.
Yeah, I like that term, even just cultural exchange. I like this idea of sharing ideas. And I think you're right. A good, or at least a top level background or basic understanding of the part of the world they're coming from. And, if you can glean some basic knowledge, obviously the more prepared you can be, the better. I don't think anybody, or most people anyway, would expect you to have a complete, deep understanding of their culture and everything. But like an example that I use is even just in my experience in Spain, for example, from the, first time I went there to the last time I've been there, my Spanish has improved a lot. It's still not great, but it's better. And, now we can do a little more communicating than we could do before. But what I found is even though my Spanish sucks, it's more appreciated that I'm trying than if I hadn't been trying at all. And not to say that you need to, not to advocate that everybody go out and learn every dialect so that you can just ask people where the bathroom is. But, but what I'm trying to say is that by taking a little time and putting a little effort in, even though I'm not good at it, it's appreciated, right? They respect the fact that you're trying to, pick up something from their culture. And we're all going to misstep. We're all going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to say the wrong thing. There's some words that, if you know them in Spanish that are South American Spanish, but you say them in Spain or vice versa, then you're saying things that you don't think you're saying. And, and those sorts of things might get missed, right? So people are going to make mistakes. And I think that's okay. I think most people are good and they want to try and work with you. But I think you're right that by being, again, intentional, everybody drink, we can try and go out there and be better for everybody else.
Exactly. Yeah. And like now you mentioned language, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they are learning a language, which is great. People need to learn languages just as you did with Spanish. Just go out there and practice your Spanish. But we talked about language and we talked about culture. And language are not just a bunch of letters together, in every cultural exchange, in every cultural communication, or if you're speaking in a foreign language, you don't need to think that just like a language, just like an alphabet, like a bunch of words put together. If you want to speak that language fluently, if you really want to be bilingual, you need to understand the culture behind the language. It is super important. You need to understand the context when you can say a sentence. Maybe you can use that sentence in Spain, but if you go to Mexico, just don't do it. In what kind of situations? So culture is not just important for for making to kind of making deals or to be in business with someone else. It is super important as well if you are learning a new language, because it is the context, is the background that you need to learn.
And also not even if we talk about culture and language and how they mix, you can be really fluent in a language that if you don't understand the culture behind it, your communication is going to be really, really poor, because you are not going to get the culture behind it, and that communication is going to be cold. It's going to be poor. So it's not going to be the same. So that's going to be really awkward. Even if you are really fluent, it's going to be an awkward communication with that person because you don't get the culture, you don't get the context.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I guess if I was going to try and leave just one little nugget here that tries to help people in their sort of cross-cultural exchange, whether you are regardless of which side of the exchange you're on, if you're an American working with a Spanish person or a French person working with a German person or whatever, I guess part of the thing is just, practice that empathy that we've been talking about sort of throughout this conversation. Be willing to let people make mistakes. Understand that they're not going to know everything about you and your background and your culture. I mean, they can't possibly pick it all up before they meet you, and I think that sort of by just, I guess, being cool with one another, we can make these cultural interactions work. And I think that they're going to become more and more prevalent in remote work, especially as, the globe sort of gets even smaller than it was before, as technology makes it easier for everybody to work together. And I think that, by having just sort of that empathy and being sensitive to the needs of other people, I think we're going to find that we navigate that stuff pretty well.
And I think that's the right definition. The world is it's smaller than 10 years ago, right? And I think that empathy or this cultural exchange, it is a skill that we have been working on for the last 10 years, but no more than that. If we think about the world, the way our parents travel, how much they travel, it is not as much as we travel right now. So that cultural exchange was not made as often in the past. So it is something that humans are learning right now a lot, because we are traveling more. We are just in contact with different cultures more. Right now, we just need a phone and we FaceTime. We need a computer and we FaceTime. Before 50, 100 years ago, they needed different things. And it was it needed people needed like more effort and more time to make these connections. That's why they were not made as often as right now. So it's a skill that we are improving right now as the human race, I guess, because as you say, the world is smaller.
Yeah, and another thing that you mentioned is super important. Just have an open mind, like be open-minded. It is super important. Like maybe if communication kind of like bothers you, or kind of like you feel annoyed by something that the other person said, just think that that's maybe normal in their culture, or he didn't or she didn't mean to hurt you or to annoy you. It's just like how they communicate. So just have that open mind. It's going to help you a lot. And I mean, like, not the one thing that it's great for us, and if we ever own a company or a CEOs or whatever, I would have people from all over the world. To be honest, I would have people in my company from different backgrounds. I would have them from different, like countries, different parts of the world, because what they bring to the table, like a different knowledge, different background, different
points of view,
perspective. They know how a different system works because they work in a USA system with the company, and they work in their, in their country, in the different system, like what all of those people from all around the world can bring to the table, that's priceless, so kind of like that's what we really think. And it's not like everyone has to have, like employees from all around the world, but we really think, and we highly, highly recommend to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's one of those things that makes like the United States such a cool thing, a great experiment, is this idea that it really was formed as this melting pot of people coming from all over the world, all over the place. And, and it's manifest in a country that is on the cutting edge of innovation and technology and all these different things. And it's not because of any one individual or because of the people who were here early on or whatever. It's because of this collective knowledge of the world coming into one place, just like it could do in a smaller situation in a company. I think that that's a really beautiful point and something good to end on. So before we get out of here, do you guys want to just sort of tell the listeners where they can learn more about you guys, if they want to work with you or hire you as consultants, or if they'd like to, maybe have you give a keynote or something?
Yeah, we have our web page, which is eTwinz.com, eTwinz.com, and also like social media, Instagram, eTwinz, EDU, Twitter, eTwinz as well, Facebook, eTwinz. So
great.
We have a social media, and then our, in our website, they have, like some examples of our work, what we do and all of that. So just contact us for, like if you're interested in doing something, some project together, or like hiring us for something.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I'll also, in the show notes, I'll include LinkedIn information and that kind of stuff so people can get connected. And yeah, that's it. So thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate having you on.
Of course. Thank you for the invite. It was great.
It was our pleasure.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, guys. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in this week and every week. And we'll see everybody next time.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you.